Welcome back to the Craig Fahle Show here on NewRadioMedia.com. Glad to have you with me on this Tuesday. Coming up a little bit later on, Barb McQuaid is going to join us on the program. She, of course, has written a piece for The Hill suggesting that attacks on Mueller need to stop and that this investigation needs to proceed. We'll hear from her about the latest in the investigation, what she knows about it, and what she can tell us about the strategies being utilized by both Trump's defenders and, of course, those who would like to see him face more scrutiny. So we'll get into that a little bit later on. Also, Chad Livengood from Cranes will join us to talk about what leverage the Gordie Howe Bridge may play in our NAFTA negotiations. So we'll get into that as well. But first, I want to talk a little bit about medical marijuana. Now, most of the marijuana discussion in Michigan lately, of course, has been around the ballot question that will be on the ballot in November as to whether or not recreational marijuana should be legalized. So the thought about medical marijuana has sort of gone to the back burner. However, it is still a very, very important discussion. There's not enough research, frankly, being done as to what types of conditions could be effectively treated by marijuana. However, yesterday, the state did approve 11 medical conditions, including autism, chronic pain, Parkinson's, and Tourette's, and others. We'll get into those in just a little bit, that you can get a prescription for medical marijuana to treat, which is a big deal. Now, there have been some folks that have been advocating for more. In fact, I think they were asking for 22 more. Joining me right now to talk a little bit more about it is Michael Komorn, who's an attorney and the president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association. He joins us in studio today. Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Craig. Appreciate it.
So I guess we'd call this a victory yesterday in part. 11 of the 22 treatments or ailments that you were looking to be able to have treated with medical marijuana were approved by the state yesterday. This is not an easy feat to get any of them approved.
It is not, and I would say this was not unexpected. The ultimate approval goes to the director of Laura Shelley Egerton, who followed the recommendation of the panel that had heard the testimony. They had already decided of the ones that we'd filed, the 21 or 22, and made recommendations that 11 of them be approved and the remaining not be approved. And she followed those recommendations, didn't alter from their recommendations.
So when you take a look at this, the things that the existing list included things like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, cancer, glaucoma, HIV/AIDS, and a lot of these were meant to alleviate pain and nausea, things along those lines. But it seems as our knowledge increases about the possibilities here, that there is a willingness to expand that list on the part of the states, not just Michigan, but other states that have adopted medical marijuana, despite the fact that there is really not much research being done on this. How have we been able to change minds as to the efficacy of marijuana when it comes to treating these ailments?
And it's still Schedule 1. In Michigan, this is ridiculous.
Well, we'll get into that in a second.
Very good. The process in Michigan is one that should and can be used by anybody. We happen to interact oftentimes with patients who've had and know of people or family members that have benefited from the use of cannabis for a wide variety of ailments. It was not difficult getting those people to come forward. I mean, they're the heroes here because they're the ones that put themselves forward and explained how, they talked about their conditions and how cannabis has helped them. But assuming that we're able to provide, research that supports the medical efficacy, then it has to be put to a public hearing. The panel then has to hear testimony. If they find that there is palliative relief by the use in this particular circumstance to treat that condition, then the panel is supposed to recommend it to the director. It's not a big hurdle. It's if it helps persons and they find that there's the threshold has been met that it is palliative, then they should recommend it. And it doesn't need to be proven. It's that it's palliative and can assist people and protect them from being arrested, and that's really the key.
Well, at the same time, though, where are we when it comes to doctors' willingness to prescribe at this point in time? That has been an issue, and especially since it is still Schedule 1. Doctors do not want to get in trouble. They worry about it. So where are we when it comes to getting doctors to be willing to prescribe?
The first few years there was very
blanket question. It's all anecdotal at this point.
It is, but you will see that the statistics on the number of doctors that were originally being that were making recommendations the first few years that the program was operating has expanded. There's many more doctors that are participating in the program. That's number one. Number two is it is not a prescription. It's a recommendation. Mm-hmm. And it is an exercise of really a First Amendment right to have that conversation with the physician, the privacy of your the doctor's office and have them make a recommendation for something that may even be Schedule 1 and illegal. Doctor's not supposed to get it for them, tell them where to get it, but make a recommendation that it may be something that alleviates, their issues and or is palliative in its applications. So it's not a script doctors should be more inclined to use, especially in today's day and age when the traditional use of treating chronic pain or pain is opioids, and we have this opioid crisis in our country. And for all purposes, cannabis is a much safer alternative.
I guess that's the debate then is, of course, it's a recommendation, not a prescription. However, the FDA just approved a new drug called, I believe it's Epidiolex or Epidiolex or something like that. It's a cannabinoid derivative thing made to treat seizures. This is actually going to force the DEA to take a look at whether or not to reclassify it. And if that were to happen and they reclassify, take it off of Schedule 1, is that a situation which could open the door for actual prescriptions for medical marijuana, which would allow for people to potentially get to use their medical insurance to pay for it?
Those are good questions. Michigan does have a law. It was Senate Bill 660. It's been enacted. It states that if the federal government reschedules to Schedule 2, then they can sell marijuana through pharmacies. So that is already in effect. If that happens, the mechanism's already in play. It's a much greater complex issue, I think, because I don't know that the DEA is ever going to be in the market of selling plant material. Like, you don't find the purchase of plant material. It's always an extraction or something that can be synthesized or perfected in some kind of pharmaceutical lab.
Sure.
It's not the plant material. So you're always going to have people that are going to want to purchase for medical purposes the cannabis plant itself, the plant material, and ingest it in various forms. So but I agree. If we move to a different scheduling, then you're going to have a whole new ball game, and there's going to be different prohibitions and who may or may not be able to utilize it. But we've seen a tremendous growth in the patient base, and I think that this is going to be an expansion of opportunities for people that have these ailments.
My guest right now is Michael Komorn, who's an attorney and the president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association. We're talking about the news that came out that the state has just added 11 new conditions that would qualify people to be eligible to use marijuana for treatment purposes. There have been a lot of questions as to why this is going to matter if indeed voters in Michigan decide to legalize recreational marijuana. Why is this classification on medical marijuana still going to be important if indeed the state goes that route?
Well, for starters, the one that was most meaningful to us, my law firm, and a lot of the people that we experienced this journey with, was the autism getting approved. Many of those patients are minors. There's always additional attention brought to it. The rules require 2 doctors to sign off on it, and the parent or guardian has to be the caregiver and acquire cannabis and be in charge of the dosing and whatnot. But we went through this 3 years ago, and we actually it was an amazing experience, and I would say that it's been a big change in the state, Lara, in the way that they've dealt with the cannabis community. They're much more organized and responsive. They have a lot more money that's been put into because of the licensing, so they're dealing with this differently. But at the time, it was a much more adversarial process, and we actually had this amazing experience where we convinced what appeared to be a very antagonistic panel, got them to vote 4-2 in favor of autism just a few years ago, and it was sent to Mike Zimmer, the head of Lara at the time. He rejected it for reasons that are irrational and seem silly today, such as using oil or food products was potentially legal, and they didn't want to criminalize the parents or the children for this. Well, the law has been changed, and it's retroactive, and that comment seems silly and a terrible reason. And at the end of the day, the significance of this is that kids will have access. Parents who are treating their kids will not have issues of being arrested and prosecuted. Also, the licensing rules, as they go forward into legalization and adopt that framework into the existing medical, assuming that it passes, there's going to be a reduction in the taxing and expense for patients, I believe. So there'll be some kind of benefit to them, and those that are operating within the patient base as opposed to recreational will have some kind of financial benefit.
Okay, so some of the excise taxes that are going to be put on recreational use may be eliminated for those who are actually getting it for medical reasons.
That's the plan for the recreational when it goes into effect.
Now, I want to get back into this question of the FDA for just a second because, again, the FDA has approved this pot-derived drug for seizures for certain types of epilepsy. The DEA's got to make a decision on whether to allow it to be sold, frankly. But it seems to me that the biggest change that that happens as a result of moving it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 is the ability for researchers to start digging in even further as to what the capabilities of marijuana are when it comes to all these different ailments. And how critical is it going to be to have that scientific backup to bolster your arguments that, frankly, this is something that could be good for a whole host of conditions?
I understand what you're saying. You're really, like, there's always the argument there's not enough research, but there really is. If it's out there. PubMed has 27,000 articles, I think, on cannabis research. It's deep, much more than people want to realize. Yes, more so than Adderall. There's like 9,000 articles on PubMed about Adderall, which is equally, or meds for ADHD that is overprescribed, one would say. So it's not that it's not there. You have all these states that have legalized it. You have emergency rooms. You have doctors that have been overseeing this. You have, there's statistics and patterns that have been drawn from this, and there's positive statistics coming out of it in terms of overdosing, deaths associated with drug abuse are all down in these states when marijuana is an option legally or medically. Fewer people overdose. That's the bottom line, and you see the reduction in opioid use in those states as well. So there's a positive impact. Now, the changes that Michigan are going to endure, I think, are going to be for the positive. There's a lot of people that have been behind this. They're expecting legalization to happen. And there's still going to be concerns of how it's going to be implemented in relationship to the public health code and those prohibitions that exist right now. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the leadership in the law enforcement community. I think, with the Attorney General opinion, the implementation of legalization is going to be derived from that authority.
In a strange way, is possibly the keeping it as a Schedule 1 one of those things that keeps the research out of the hands of the Pfizers of the world and companies like that, which would seek ways to monetize this in a way that perhaps those who are growing their own or buying from independent dispensaries are not?
Well, it's weird that it is on a list that's considered controlled.
Yeah.
It's so uncontrolled. In fact, the program that's set up by the state is the opposite of controlled. There's no pharmaceutical input. The fact that it's being tested is just, putting numbers on it that really have no significance anywhere, right? So I understand what you're saying. Like the concern has always been if it goes to a Schedule 2 or Schedule 3 or something to that effect, you're going to have more severe penalties because the, financial backing of a pharmaceutical company far exceeds a law enforcement community.
Mm-hmm.
Not just going to kick in your door, shoot your dog, and take your items. They can have you disappear. They can take you to an island they own and just, if you're making their pharmaceutical drug in your basement, for example, right? So it is a concern. I think that the better answer is to, some of the federal legislation, for example, I think is to leave it to the states, keeping the federal government out of it, unscheduling it, or treating it like alcohol and regulating it in that regard as opposed to like a controlled scheduled drug. I think that's the other types of options that are developing. But I do, and the community is far aware that if it does get scheduled to a schedule or rescheduled to Schedule 2, it's not going to help anybody. It's going to potentially become more restrictive.
All right, we're going to take a break here, but I want you to stick around for a few more minutes to talk about this. My guest right now is Michael Komorn, who's an attorney and the president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association. We're discussing really the fact that Michigan just approved 11 more conditions that can be treated with medical marijuana. However, 11 were turned down. I want to talk a little bit about the reasons why here in just a moment and what the next steps are to make sure that some of these things could be treated, things like schizophrenia, social anxiety disorder, some others. We'll get into that in just a moment. You're listening to The Craig Fahle Show and watching The Craig Fahle Show on newradiomedia.com. We'll be back after a short break. Quick reminder, Barb McQuaid's going to be joining us in the next hour of the program as well to talk about the Mueller investigation, so stick around for that too. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Art, and we're the crew at Tuffy Walled Lake. We've been in Walled Lake for 20 years, and through our knowledgeable staff and customer satisfaction, we've become quite the cornerstone in our community and to our discerning customers statewide. We know how important your vehicle is to you, and we take pride in our impeccable, affordable service, and we're trying to get you back on the road as quickly and safely as we possibly can. Please stop in and see why everybody comes from all over to get their cars serviced at 784 North Pontiac Trail in Walled Lake.
Hey, you guys, it's Raphael of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Guess what? The only thing we can get down here in the sewer is Geektainment Weekly on New Radio Media. Turtle Power!
As a business owner, you're always looking to save money and cut costs where you can. And if you advertise on radio or television, you know it can get pretty pricey. If radio and TV aren't delivering like they promised, and you're looking for a more reasonably priced way to get your message to the masses, I've got an answer for you. New Radio Media. With live streaming and on-demand programming, your message can be seen throughout the day, and you can worry a little less about cutting those costs. For more information, go to newradiomedia.com or call Buzz Van Houten at 248-939-9999.
Maple Lane Golf Club is a 54-hole golfing treasure located in the heart of Sterling Heights. Maple Lane Golf Club offers immaculate greens, a top-flight pro shop, and inexpensive green fees. For convenience, book your tee time online at maplelanegolf.com. Come out and enjoy a great golf experience. Try our 9 and Dine special. 9 holes of golf and enjoy food and refreshments in the Clubhouse Bistro. That's Maple Lane Golf Club in Sterling Heights. Check us out at maplelanegolf.com.
Welcome back to the Craig Fahle Show here on newradiomedia.com. Just about 10 minutes left in the first hour of the program, and I'm glad that you are here with me on this Tuesday. My guest is Michael Komorn, attorney and president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, joining me here in the studio. We were talking over the break about that federal classification and some of the potential impact that has. You wanted to go back to that for just a second to talk about, some of the ramifications of that.
Well, the point I was trying to make is it's the fact that the federal government is looking at licensing medications that contain THC is not uncommon. You've got Marinol and there's other Sativex was another one that had come out, and this one the federal government knows and has a patent. Actually, the U.S. government has a patent on cannabis as a analgesical and cell reproduction. They know that it is a medicine. The whole thing, I would suggest, is not an accurate assessment, or called false information that it's Schedule 1. I mean, our state has been now, it's 10 years since the Medical Marijuana Act has passed. We've got story after story of how it assists people. It's hard to believe that it doesn't have any medical benefits.
Well, okay, so you get 11 of the 22 that you're asking for are on the list. Some of them that were left off, I'm going to read them. Anxiety, asthma, brain injury, depression, diabetes, gastric ulcer, non-severe and non-chronic pain, organ transplant, panic attacks, schizophrenia, and social anxiety disorder were left off the list. What was the rationale?
Well, it was interesting because, as I said, we had this experience a few years ago. It's the same board. Some had changed their position on a lot of the conditions. Some that had voted no against autism were voting yes. But there was an interesting dynamic of how this played out. Each person was from a different background. Some were doctors, some were in the health profession, some were psychologists. You had the Eden Wells, is the director of the Michigan's medical organization, and the reasons were based on they weren't based on anything. They were just ideas that were not founded in any kind of research. They just seemed to not want it.
Non-chronic pain, if chronic pain is something that is allowed for treatment, it certainly seems as if non-chronic pain might be something that benefits as well. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like saying, well, you can take Tylenol 800s, but you can't take Tylenol 200s.
And it's interesting because there's a physician that does a fantastic job. He's always advocating for it. And he made the point, look, we have severe and chronic pain right now. There's times when someone may just have severe pain. And I don't want to be uncomfortable with having to overextend my diagnosis. I want to be honest. I don't want to have to question those. So he was an advocate for a lot of these other issues. And the overarching theme for all of this is you have people that are going to be using cannabis to treat these conditions anyways. Do you want them to get arrested at this point? If these people are before you testifying that it's working and explain it to you, the only issue is if we add it to the list, it's a reason that a doctor can qualify them. If you do not put on the list and they can't get qualified, then they're stuck until some time of recreational.
You get a sense that there's again, you were discussing the possibility of tax breaks for people who have medical cards as opposed to those who maybe buy recreationally whenever Michigan decides on this, which they will in November, and it looks like it's going to pass at this point in time. Would there be a rationale to keep some of these things off the list, especially something like non-severe and non-chronic pain, as a revenue generator for the state? I mean, that's very much a conspiratorial sort of take.
No, I know. And I actually suggested to the board when I got a chance to speak to them that expanding the list is good for the state because they do have a regulated program now. When they do issue licenses, these are the places the patients are going to go. If you increase the list, we're at 290,000 patients, I think it's something like that. You've opened up the door for many more people, at least until the legalization happens. And the people that are there talking about it are they're real, genuine stories, putting their medical history and circumstances out there, and
For somebody who's waiting for the November vote, right? What's the rationale in your mind for them, if indeed they have a chronic medical condition or something that they're dealing with? What's the rationale for getting a medical marijuana card as opposed to just buying it at a dispensary on your own?
Well, I think that there's ways to address the medical use of marijuana that are different than recreational. In the community, which is often not spoken about, there's variations of methods of ingestion. There's variations of the types that people ingest, varying from higher CBD, which reduce some of the quote unquote effects of THC. So there's a number of different ways, and in that pursuit, people can find medical relief, whatever it may be. And I think if you're just looking at it for a recreational purpose, I think I'm in favor of recreational. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying from a medical perspective, there's relief for individuals that genuinely can find it with and from the cannabis plant.
Well, we've got 1 minute left here in this segment. Michael Komorn, my guest right now. How optimistic are you feeling about this right now? Because we have come a long way since when we first had this discussion on my program, probably, 6-7 years ago?
That's what I think it was. It's interesting the way the state has come around recently and almost took it up as a legislative act by putting forth the legalization. But I still think we have not, the law enforcement community especially has not been brought up to speed, educated wise, and they rely too much on the revenue generated by criminalizing marijuana. That's my concern. I am optimistic, though, because I do think that the momentum has been so compelling that people have woken up and realized that this is the direction things are going to go.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it right there. Michael Komorn, again, attorney and president of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association. We appreciate your time, sir. And I fully expect, if indeed this does pass, that there will be a loosening on some of these other ailments that could be covered by this. I'd like to see that be the case, but you never know, because sometimes that medical supervision and the different types of things that might be available through a doctor as opposed to, or at least recommendations from a doctor, could be a little bit more than just picking something out on your own. So you never know. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
All right, this is the Craig Fahle Show on NewRadioMedia.com. We've got to take a quick